Yay!
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Hello and welcome to More Than Music. I'm Ronan Browne and this is my special guest, Siobhán Armstrong.
Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Ronan.
Great to have you. It's music. It's always about music. Has been so far anyway.
Good.
But harp. How many harps do you have?
Oh, far too many and never enough would be my answer to that. I suppose I play all different kinds of harps, but the harps that I play, I suppose the one thing that they have in common is that they all died out. So I'm not sure that's a very positive reason, but I'm really keen on all of these instruments that we don't hear anymore, that we can hear, that we can try and reconstruct that sound world, try and get a glimpse of what might, what might have been, see how close we can get. So I play all different kinds of harps from Ireland and from all around Europe, from the Middle Ages all the way into the 18th century. Some of them have gut strings, some of them have wire strings, some of them have one row of strings, some of them have 3 parallel rows of strings. One of them has 2 crossed over rows of gut strings. So that's my Spanish baroque harp. My Italian one has 3 parallel rows. So it's like the white keys on the piano on the 2 outer rows and the black notes of the piano in the middle row. And if it sounds complicated, yep. So you have to kind of knit your fingers in and out to try and play all the harmony.
And that begs the question, do you ever subconsciously think you're playing one of them? And you do the movements for the wrong one?
That's a good question. Generally, no. I seem to have different bits of my brain that they slot into different bits. But if I've been playing one of them for a long time and then suddenly I play the other one, like there's a particular characteristic of an early Irish harp. I have 2 early Irish harps with me tonight, a copy of a late medieval one and a copy of one from the early 18th century. And they have this really peculiar characteristic that they have 2 G strings below middle C. They were called in Irish Nicole, which we think maybe means lying together. So you have these 2 G strings. So I get used to those, and then I go to my baroque harp, and I'm kind of leaping around as if there should be 2 G strings, but of course there aren't on other harps. So.
And my memory was that you didn't have the Coley on this harp, but you do now.
Well, the reason I didn't have it on this harp is because this isn't as exact a copy as this one is. And I think that makes a difference. So the real Trinity College harp, now we have even sort of better copies, should I say, nowadays. And so the string spacing on these instruments, it's really anarchic, and it's not like modern pedal harps where each string is equidistant to every other string. Early Irish harps are like the early Irish brain. It's completely mad. So some of the strings are wider towards the top on the Trinity harp, and some of them are more bunched up down towards the bottom.
Very much done on purpose.
And I think that's on purpose. I mean, on my downhill harp here, they seem to be a bit more equidistant, but on the two or three surviving medieval harps, down at the bottom, they're not just sort of randomly bunched up, they're bunched up from the Coley strings. So I think if you have, they're 2 sides of the same coin. You need the similar sort of medieval string spacing, and then you need Nicole, and then that kind of all works together. So if they're equidistant, it's kind of more tricky. So it was early days. I didn't have it on that, but I do on this. Because
when that was made, when that was built for you about 30 years ago?
20, yeah, maybe it wasn't built for me, actually. There's a bit of a scale attached to this harp that my wonderful colleague in America, Anne Heyman, who was the doyenne of the modern revival of playing early Irish harp, she put a lot of her heart and soul into this because 2 twin harps got built in America by David Courtier, who sadly we lost in the last 12 months, and he was the preeminent builder then of early Irish harps. So she had one built for her and one built for somebody else, a Canadian who lived in Japan of all places. And he was a literature professor who came over to study with me at one point. He said, I'm bringing this harp with me, but I'm of Scottish extraction, so really I want a copy of the Queen Mary harp, the Scottish medieval harp. And he said, but maybe it might find a buyer in Europe. And he took it out in my room, in my music room. And I remember touching the strings and going, wow, this is the best early Irish harp I've ever heard. It was much better than a smaller, sort of more modern design one that I had when I started out. So I said, Robert, don't spend too much money on advertising it. That would be a waste of money. So this harp sort of crept into my music room. It went all the way from America to Japan to Kilballyquilty outside Carrick-on-Shore, and it became my harp. So I'm, really.
Well, we're going to hear
thrilled
that one later, but it doesn't have those. I'm fascinated by these Coley strings.
Yeah, we
But
don't really know.
This one does.
Yeah, we don't know why they're on the harp. People come up with all sorts of theories about why.
Have you got any of those theories?
Well, the most sensible one, the one that makes most sense to me, is a very practical one, because musicians are always practical at the end of the day. And so if you have the bass strings closer together, maybe you can fit more strings on the harp, or maybe it's easier to damp those strings because they're close together. And that's the thing we have to do on early Irish harp, because you'll hear it's so resonant that you can't let all the strings ring. Some of the art of playing it is to damp some strings while you're playing others. So you're kind of hearing half the work when people play this harp. So it could be that they're easier to damp when they're closer together. But then your octave, like your C to C, D to D, that sort of changes as you go down the harp, which feels really weird. So if you put in an extra string, it kind of evens it out, and an octave still feels like an octave. So that's the most plausible theory I've heard. But there are layers of reasons why it is. So the sort of mythological ones, or Anne Heyman has this theory about that it's sort of where the male and the female part of the harp meet. So it's sort of, it's a sort of a gender thing, and they meet in the middle. And all of these things are possible at the same time.
And they must have a different tone, because the strings are getting longer as you go down, they're getting shorter as you go up.
Yeah.
So these, although they're playing the same note side by side, one is going to be
slightly different to
half
the other.
an inch. It's quite a lot.
I mean, maybe the even more plausible theory is that the two, by the time the harpers were spoken to in the 18th century and asked about this and asked about the tuning and how the harp was tuned, the Coley are on G, and that's pretty significant, because G is kind of the home tuning of the harp. So there are two tunings that the harpers in the 18th century told Edward Bunting about, who was frantically writing down as much as he could, this young teenager. And so they said, well, there are two tunings. It goes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So it's like a major scale. Or G, A, B, C, D, E, F natural, G. And so, but they're all coming from G. Now, you'd have different modes, A to A, D to D, E to E. But G is really the home of the harp. So maybe it's extra resonant. I'm realizing at this point that I forgot to bring my bottle of water. So if somebody down the back...
I'll run and get the water. Oh, we can't, because this has to be open.
Yeah, no, but maybe if I think there's water around here somewhere, but probably I'm going to need it in the next hour. So thanks very much if somebody can organise that.
Could you show them and let people hear them?
Oh, sorry, I take it back. Come back. I have my water bottle.
I'll take the water.
It was
I've
the
no
same
water.
colour as the stage. I didn't see it. Thank you so much. All right, so...
I won't take it.
So let me show you this. So this is my copy of the Downhill Harp from 1702, and it's really important for all sorts of reasons. Number one, we know the man who played it. That was Dennis O'Hampsey, or Dennis Hempson, who was the most important harper, who was playing at the Belfast Harpers meeting in 1792 at the end of this 900 or maybe even longer years of tradition. And he's the old guy who's still playing with his long nails on his brass wire strings. They're all playing on brass wire strings, because that's all we ever had in Ireland.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
That with those metal strings, using your fingers won't give enough sound.
Well, I'll show you, because 9 of them, he was playing with nails, so it sounds something like this. And if I play without nails, do you hear how it's slightly muted? You don't get the same attack on the front of the string. And I'm not playing louder, I'm just playing with nails or without nails.
So it might be sacrilegious, but I like them both.
Oh, very good, because both are historical. Because
and both are possible. You can have the long
nails.
nails.
Yes, of course.
And still...
Well, in Belfast in 1792, one old guy is still playing with the nails, and everybody else was playing without nails. So,
But when he was playing with his nails, could he then do what you just did and play slightly sideways?
I don't think he would have done, no, because this is, I'm playing in a kind of a modern way. I'm putting my thumbs up and my fingers down to switch my nails off, whereas a historical playing technique is kind of 90 degrees, 90 degrees to, like, it's very different.
Yeah.
It's very different to modern harping. The whole aesthetic, the whole way the instrument is built, like it's a tree trunk. It's a tree trunk that you cut down and hollow out the back and put a backboard on. And that's very different to a modern Irish harp, which is, that's developed from the European pedal harp. So it has a rounded back and a soundboard that's attached with glue. So that's a completely different nest of instruments compared to this one.
At the risk now of, we'll be jumping around. The problem, everybody, with Siobhán and myself is that once we start talking...
Yeah. I mean, we heard that this is an hour long. Well, maybe.
Before I forget, I always love, this is the harp that I know and love very much, more than this one. But with this one, you've got these cartwheels, excuse me for the sacrilege of that.
Yeah.
But it looks like the wall thickness of that timber is thicker than here, but maybe it's just the darkness. But what I do feel is that that front section is very, very thin.
Yeah. I
Is
mean,
it, you know,
I don't know. I mean, you're talking to the wrong person. You need to talk to Dr. Karen Loomis, who runs the Historical Harp Society with me. She's the world organologist on these things, and she would tell you the precise thickness of the sound board on a Trinity and a downhill. She knows all that stuff. I'm
but
really bad at that.
they're not thick.
But they're not.
They look very
no.
substantial.
Yeah.
But that's mostly air. It's like Swiss cheese
exactly.
harp.
Well, they're hollow inside. So we know the man who owned the harp, and we know exactly what the gamut of the harp is, what all the strings were. So it goes down to a C, and it goes up to a D, and it has the Coley stringing. And that's the only one of the surviving 18 Irish harps that we have, 17 or 18 Irish harps that we have, that we know exactly what the lowest and highest string is. And that's really important. And then we know the music that he played on it, because Edward Bunting copied. Bunting knew that he was the living treasure in Belfast, and so he copied down what he was playing, not just the tunes, but also what the other hand was doing. And that's been my research work over the last 20 years or so, but specifically over the last 6 years, to really figure out what the playing style, what the old Irish harp style is, and of course very different to modern harping. But we can maybe talk about that again as we go.
You can talk about that whenever you want.
Thank you.
But will you play us something?
Yeah, I will. So let me see. I'll play you, and it's lovely because I see Nicholas Carolyn in the audience tonight, and this is lovely because Nicholas brought out a wonderful edition of the very first collection of Irish tunes to be published in Ireland, which was in 1724, called A Collection of the Most Celebrated Irish Tunes. And that now there's a beautiful edition, a modern facsimile of this from the Irish Traditional Music Archive, thanks to the person who's sitting in front of me there. So bravo for all the work you've done on Neil, on the John and William Neil, the father and son who brought this out. And one of my favourite laments, which may or may not be by Carolyn. It's not really sure. I think it probably is, but it doesn't say so in the source, is a tune called Turlach Og Macdonacha, or Councillor Macdonough's Lamentation, they call it in the English language source, because it's Dublin and it's the early 18th century, so it's going to be in English. And it's a very beautiful lament. It's an elegy on the death of Turlach Og Macdonacha, who was an incredible person in the 18th century. He was one of the few Catholics, possibly the only Catholic who was allowed to practice at the bar. He was a lawyer, so he was helping to kind of keep Catholic estates together from being broken up. So his death was a huge loss to Ireland. So somebody, may have been Carolyn, composed this incredibly beautiful song. And you and I know this well because we have this wonderful trio with Roisin Elsofty, the incredible piano singer from Connemara. And so I always have Roisin in my ear singing this when I'm playing it, because the words are everything, as we all know. So Táim dubh críoch galore, I'm black-hearted enough, it starts out. So here we go. Thank you.
I always think when I listen to Siobhán playing these instruments, I've died and gone to heaven. But I think there are two heavens, because this is mini heaven, and main heaven is the tone that I get from the other one. Wait till you hear that. That's incredible, but this is even incredibler.
Well, to be fair, you're kind of comparing a baby with a really experienced adult. Because this harp is like 25, maybe nearly 30 years old now. And this one was part of my PhD project, because I was working on O'Hampsey's, eight of O'Hampsey's pieces, to try and figure out what the old Irish harp idiom is. And so I had to have a copy of his harp built. So it's quite new in a way. It's only like 4 or 5 years old, maybe less. So you have to give it a chance, Ronan. You have to give it a chance.
Watching you,
Yeah.
you're showing potential. I'd hate to do this to you, but any chance you could drag it up again and let us hear those two Coley strings?
Sure.
Because we never did that, and I'm still.
So middle C, B, A, G, G, F, E, D, C.
They do have a different tone. I know they're slightly tuned. There's a tiny tuning discrepancy
They're not
there.
quite at the same pitch.
But I'm still hearing a tonal thing. The longer one is a little mellower. What was the second one there?
That's the lower one.
Oh, maybe it's the wrong way around, or maybe my ears are gone. Either way, they do sound different.
But for sure, if you have two strings the same pitch beside each other, I mean, that's going to resonate. You know,
Yeah.
it's going to resonate differently through the harp.
And something I was thinking of there, and we've often spoken about it, and I've shown you old recordings of pipers,
Yeah.
because these are the oldest recordings we have of Irish music. There are a lot of recordings from the late 1800s and early 1900s of pipers. And harmony, we have the regulators, we have the
Right.
drones, which are flapping away all the time, but we have the chords, the notes, and the regulators where we can choose different notes. You're there with almost the world's greatest train set. You can do anything you want. And yet it appears that, like those old recordings of the pipers, you're playing octaves and unison notes.
Yeah, because you're the one who, because I sort of see a parallel between you and me, in that I spend my life looking at dusty manuscript pages, trying to look over Bunting's shoulder. There's Edward Bunting, 19 and in his 20s and a bit older, scribbling down music. He's in McGilligan. He's up there in Derry with Dennis O'Hampsey at his house, and you can see he's frantic. He's a really clever guy. He's frantically writing it down, but of course he's influenced by his art music brain. He's an Anglican church music organist, so he's used to like bar lines, and the switch goes up or down. It's either major or minor. He does no understanding of modal music. So I'm looking over his shoulder and trying to kind of reverse engineer or get rid of all that classical music stuff that's in his brain and in mine too, because that's my training, and see what Dennis O'Hampsey's really doing. So that's my work, and I see that you do exactly the same. You spend your life listening to archive recordings of, I mean, you've come to my festival in Kilkenny and you have blown our minds by playing us stuff from the end of the 19th century. And you do these incredible classes where instead of, because we'd listen to them and all we'd hear is like, with a little something in the background, you go, no, listen again. And then we start to hear. So you're doing with archive recordings what I'm doing with manuscript pages. So I just find that endlessly just amazing what you do, because I see that there's a parallel thing. We're both trying to see what happened long ago because we're curious about it.
And what we're getting out of it is that harmony isn't a thing in Irish music. The single melody line is.
Yeah, well, again, it was really interesting because at some point you played us a recording of Patsy Toohey in America, and we all went, "Oh, he's just doing octaves with his regulators. He's like at cadences." And I went, "Oh, but that's what I see Dennis O'Hampsey doing." And that was my research question when I started doing this PhD was, what did the other hand do? It's very simple. I'm a very practical person. Wasn't doing highfalutin sort of academic research for academics. I'm doing research to help us, to help other harpists who are curious about, harping pre-1800. How do we do that thing? And when you look at O'Hampsie, it's not what we expect for the 18th century. Like European harpists are going na 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 na. They're doing chordal things. You've got full bass lines in the 18th century. You've got that are harmonizing with the melody. It's counterpoint. Two different things going. Don't see that in his playing at all. It's all about the tune, and
it's not about him not being able.
Oh,
it's
no,
a
no.
choice.
Well, you can hear. I mean, what looks like almost nothing on one of these manuscript pages, of course, when you play it on one of these harps, you suddenly, of course there's harmony, but it's created organically by letting some strings ring while you add other notes to it.
And you have harmonics that are creating those chords.
Yeah, but you really have just incredibly resonant strings. If I play a G and then play a D afterwards and then play a B somewhere, well, it is a G harmony. But I'm not playing a bass line. So what O'Hampsie seems to be doing is kind of, what the harpers do is they kind of comment on the tune. Ya-ba-da-dum, pom. Ya-ba-da-da, dee-dee-dee-dee-dum, pom. Ya-ba-da-dum, dee-dee-dum, ya-dum, dee-dee-dum, ya-dum. I mean, that's Lady of the Desert from O'Hampsie. There's stuff coming in the gaps. Where there's nothing happening in the tune, you do something else.
But it's very
But it's
sparse.
a completely different aesthetic. It's completely different.
You could easily say it's very simple, but it's not simple. It's sparse.
Yeah, it's sparse, and it speaks to the instrument, and it sort of speaks to the maybe the Middle Ages where this harp's coming from. It's so much older than anything we can imagine. So,
and that's what we're missing, as you said. When Bunting started writing down his notes and asking questions because of what he was hearing, he was only catching a little filigree.
He's catching tiny little bits.
What O'Hampsie could remember.
Yes.
And he probably didn't know a lot of the reasons why he was doing things.
I mean, they said, but Bunting would ask them, why this? Whether, we don't know, it's just, that's the way it's always been. Why are you playing that piece that way? I can't play it in any other way. This is how I've learned. I mean, O'Hampsie was doing incredible things, and a lot of the harpers had very, whispering notes. Byrne was very famous for his whispering notes, or Dominic Mungan as well. And I mean, they're all doing these incredible things. And Bunting says, well, they're not even aware of what they're doing. It's like, which maybe, I don't know if that sounds slightly pejorative, but it's this incredibly sophisticated art form. They don't need to talk about it, articulate it. They do it, like all wonderful musicians in any genre. Ask an artist to talk about the painting he's just painted. That's not going to happen. It's in the doing. It's in the, not the chatting about it.
I agree. And it's the same in the great musicians that we had access to in the last century, where people would have thought of them a lot of the time as inarticulate about their music. But when we look at it from outside, we see incredible depth in it. Yeah. And it's very easy to fall into the trap of thinking that they didn't see that depth. Yeah. They mightn't have spoken about it, but if they didn't see it, they would have played differently.
Well, it's this sort of chronocentric thing where we think we're the best and smartest humans who've ever lived, and everything we do is the best that it ever was. Well, no, not really. We had this incredible aristocratic tradition that went on until it died out. I used to say that it died out around 1800 because the Belfast Harpers meeting was in 1792. Most of them were quite elderly. Arthur O'Neill, the harper, was dead in the early 19th century. So I used to say, well, it's actually died out around 1800. But my sometime colleague at the Historical Harp Society, Simon Chadwick, has been doing incredible work over the last year or two. And he's realised that the harp schools, because they were trying to do at the turn of the 19th century what I'm trying to do with my organisation now with the Historical Harp Society, which is have instruments built, get out the manuscripts, let's all look at them together, let's support each other, let's get playing this music, let's get studying it, understanding it, and have a bunch of rental harps. And of course, they had a bunch of rental harps. They had harps built for them by the man who invented the modern Irish harp, John Egan, the pedal harp builder in Dublin, genius harp builder. And so he made, as well as his as inventing the ancestor of the modern Irish harp, he also made wire-strung harps for those students. So they're all doing that stuff. And I sort of thought the narrative was it died out around 1800, but Simon realised that there were students of the harp societies then in Dublin and Dundalk and Belfast teaching more students who were teaching other students. And would you believe the last harper who died, who played on wire strings, was a man called Paul Smith, who was living on the Quays in Dublin in 1903. It's like, what? Wow. This is at the same point that Robert Bruce Armstrong is going to the Feis Ceoil to see if anybody, because they had a competition for, early Irish harp, nobody showed up. So he went, oh, well, I guess nobody exists. And if he'd only known that on the Quays, a few hundred metres away, there was a man who still played early Irish harp. It's like, oh, the what ifs. Like in 1903, we could have got him on a cylinder recording and heard what he was doing. Be like the last castrato or something. No, we don't have it. So it's kind of fascinating, the what ifs.
And, the Historical Harp Society is something that you set up, and it's a repository. It's all the things you just mentioned there. Something I was thinking of as you were talking, all of the learned investigations, the ideas, the discussions, the papers. Are they all being gathered on your website for public consumption?
Well, they're in different places. So the Bunting's pamphlets, where they were just little pamphlets in his pocket, folded into 4 that he would get out, and then later they all got stuck together, and now they're called Manuscript 29 in Queen's University in Belfast, because they have almost all of his papers. But they're freely available online. You can just go onto their website and you can see any one of those field transcription pages where he's scribbling down, and that's where the gold is.
They are exotic and beautiful.
Yeah, because for the last 70 years, the researchers tend to have been looking at his piano arrangements, his nice, clean, easy to read piano arrangements. They go, oh yes, let's look at those. It's like, no, that's Victorian piano music. If you want to know anything about the old Irish harpists, you better be prepared to look at those really tricky, scribbledy pages and have a look at those, because in the piano arrangements, Bunting was sanitizing it, he was pacifying it, he was turning it into proper music as he saw it. And that meant in 3/4 time in, A major, whatever it was. And so, but in the field transcriptions, he doesn't have time to mess around with it so much. So
and that's where you find little extra things.
That's where I'm finding all of the
But
stuff
that's
that O'Hanley's
you
doing.
and people like you. But if an ordinary person wants to investigate the fruits of your labour, are you collating that sort of stuff?
Well, so we run discovery days around Ireland each year. We usually do 3 of them. People can come along, they can hear a lecture, learn all about it, they can hear it in concert, and then they can get their hands on one of our harps and try it out. But we also have, since COVID, I suppose we're all keen to be online, and so that people can have more access to stuff. So we have an online academy 3 times a year. 6 Saturdays in a row. You come along, you can learn all about this stuff from the comfort of your own armchair. So we have teachers teaching from, basic level up to sort of much more advanced level. And we'll be showing you manuscript pages, and we'll all be looking at them together going, what do you think that is? Is that a squashed fly or is that a note? And it's brilliant because you need more people together looking at. Every time I teach one of those classes, I learn something new about one of those pages. Because the more you look, the more you find.
And I know anytime I go down to the harp summer school in Kilkenny, new discussions open up every time.
Every single time.
Fun.
Every single time we look at a page, we go, oh, or a student will say, well, what about that? And you go, oh yeah, I never looked at that before. I had that last week because we've just finished our academic Glorship for this term. And I had students in class and they would consider themselves beginners. But when they're looking at a manuscript, we're all just human beings going, what about that thing? And so I learn as much as I teach. It's the usual thing. If you have students in front of you, you'll all teach each other.
And if anyone wants to, I'm just picturing in my mind some of those Bunting manuscripts. Do you just look up original Bunting manuscripts, Belfast, or how do you find them online?
You can email me and I'll send you the link, because it takes a little bit of finding. But basically, you just go to Queen's University Library online, and then there's a thing called Special Collections, and then just put in Bunting, the Bunting Collection or something. And all of the collection is called Manuscript 4. That's not just one manuscript. All of the papers are called Manuscript 4. And what you're really looking for is something called Manuscript 4.29. It's manuscript 29 in that collection. That's where the goodies are.
Yeah. Because even if you weren't interested in music and you just
it's
loved
just fun to
looking
look at them.
beautiful things.
It's just amazing
Mysterious
to see. Yeah,
things.
mysterious, wonderful things.
Fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a great part of our relationship has been always because to the Western art music world, I'm musically illiterate.
Oh, no, don't say illiterate.
And exactly.
Non-literate. What is this thing about illiterate? 99% of all musicians who ever lived never read a note of music.
There you go.
They never read a note of music.
But the point I was going to get to is that when I come across things in old manuscripts, and I'm now able to
You're
roughly,
perfectly capable of reading
I can
music.
pick
You're
out
just
little
lazy.
bits. I pick out
So I'll
little
tell you
bits.
what he does when he comes across a tune.
This is what I was going to say.
Yeah, when he comes across a tune, I get this little WhatsApp message going, "Can you sing this into WhatsApp for me?" And then I do. Just because, but you're perfectly capable of doing
I
it
can
yourself.
pick out a melody as it goes along, but it is a melody.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It is a melody. It never changes from that. It is a melody. And then I get on to
I
you
was
and
beaten into piano lessons from the
is
age
a
of 4.
melody.
I was beaten into piano lessons from the age of 4. So yeah, notes
Yeah,
hold
but you
no
can
fear
turn
for
these
me.
horrible inanimate objects into
Yeah, because
art and
only
beauty.
because I've been at it for years and years. So it means some to me. There's a flavour to it. It's a picture. I can, the synapses work in that direction.
And it's a wonderful thing that you bring to this, that you are looking at something that is ancient and, I don't know, is vernacular or an insulting word to
No,
use.
it's funny because I tend to use the word vernacular and other people shoot me down. They go, "That's only for architecture." But I'd say it's indigenous music, it's vernacular music.
But yet you can decode it and compartmentalize it in a good way because of that training.
Yeah, that training's very helpful.
And you can understand things quickly and move on, see things from different angles.
I
It's a
can,
great
but the thing
skill.
it doesn't help me to do is to lift that off the page and turn it into. It doesn't. I suppose it's my baroque music training. The fact that I play
That does that
17th,
for you.
16th, 15th, 16th, 17th century European music. So the 18th century harpers, they're in that world, You have Cornelius Lyons, the harper to the Earl of Antrim, and he's writing variations on Irish tunes. And if you heard them played on a harpsichord, you'd say, that's nothing to do with Ireland. That's not Irish. That's an Irish harper playing that. So I know how I would phrase that because I know how I would do it. But this is where I need to hang around with the pipers and the singers that I'm lucky enough to hang around with all my life. So it's like it's like Alan MacDonald in Scotland when I invite him over. You pipers, you Gaelic pipers are an unbelievable resource for us. And then but it's
a symbiotic relationship.
yeah, but it's the singers also because it's all about the words and the language. Like when people play carillon and they go, "Oh yeah, so playing a carillon tune," and you think, "But wait a minute, Carillon wasn't an instrumental composer. He was a bit, but Carillon was a songwriter. He's a Bob Dylan who happens to play the harp. He happens to accompany himself on the harp. He's a songwriter." So
I don't like Bob Dylan.
Well, fine, but Shinshke Lela, that's for another day. But my point is, Ronan, that he's just trying to get a rise out of me now. This is what Ronan likes to do. But the thing is that it's all about the song words and the poetry and the stresses in the poetry, and so you better have the words in your head, I think, if you're playing one of those. So they're not tunes, they're song airs. So I feel very strongly that then you should know the song and you should have some affinity with the words and the language when you play it. So I'm really lucky that I've been able to hang around with you and Roisin Elsofty in our trio, and with Bríd Nuel Chiarain before that, who I recorded with in 2004 when I started looking at this whole lost genre. For me, it's a lost genre in Irish music. There's a thing called harp songs, or the songs of the harpers, and I think they're more closely connected to sean-nós than we think. And now these days I'm working with Dimric Michalofdija up in Gweedore, and he feels very strongly that there's this huge affinity between harp songs and the sean-nós world, and he's convincing me more and more. So I show him a harp song and he goes, "Aye, there's a woman in the Blue Stack Mountains in the 1940s who was singing," and you go, "Whoa." And like you, he makes me listen to an archive recording and I go, "Oh, that's a harp song, alive and kicking in the tradition." So we're working on putting the first 10 of these together on an album that we're going to be recording in April. And I'm really excited again to work with a singer on it. Because he makes, I see these these notes in the Bunting manuscript, and he can read music, so he looks at them with me. But then he goes away and he just puts all his embedded talent to work on them, and he brings them back and he makes me play them in a completely different way. Completely different. So I'm grateful for the living tradition that can inform my dusty manuscripts.
Let's go back in time, and you were going to play on this harp.
Oh yeah, you wanted to hear.
Ducto.
You want well, it's a late medieval harp, the Trinity College harp, or the Brian Boru harp. So yeah, we thought it might be nice to play some music, maybe from the time frame of the harp. So we don't quite know how old this harp is. The sister to this in Scotland, the Queen Mary harp, Dr. Karen Loomis, my colleague in the Historical Harp Society, she did her PhD on the two medieval harps in Scotland. And unbelievably, it could be that the Queen Mary harp is from the early 1300s, which is like eye-wateringly early. So we don't really know how old this is because we haven't done carbon dating on the Trinity College harp. But so this is some of the earliest music that we would have heard in Ireland. And of course, because it survived because it was written down, and it was written down because it was ecclesiastical music in Latin sung by monks in monasteries. So it's a matins responsory, so it's something that would have been sung in the morning, probably on Sunday. So in 2 days' time, in the medieval period, you would have heard this in an office, a monastic office for the Feast of St. Patrick. And it's Ducto Angelico Mare Transiens. By angelic direction, he crosses the sea. And that's because St. Patrick is going off to Gaul to study and do all sorts of things. So, so we're going to play, it would originally have been sung, I'll play it to you. And then you're going to join me afterwards in another piece of plain chant that got turned into a traditional Irish hymn, Gauam Multifrige. So for another of the three patron saints, St. Bridget. So, so Ducto Angelico Mare and then Gauam Multifrige. But I better check my tuning first. Because you never know when these harps left on their own. You never know what happens.
So this is the died and gone to heaven harp.
No pressure.
To number one heaven.
No pressure on me. Just tune again. Because since you like it so much, I don't want you to listen to an out of tune version. If you could just stop breathing in and out and changing the humidity in the air and stuff, that would be great.
But it's the same with the pipes. I'm mortified that I have to tune.
I know. Yeah, I mean,
but
I hate
people
wasting your time.
listening love to hear things being tuned.
I don't know. Well, should we do a straw poll? Okay.
That's still out of tune.
Well, I know, but there's a limit to people's patience.
Not to mine. And don't forget, we've very little to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
And we're very shy.
You and I are always stuck for things to talk about.
Lovely.
Happy now?
I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm happy. You had a lovely word there earlier when we were chatting. Decolonization.
Yeah, not to get too heavy about it, but yeah, I do.
Just for 30 seconds.
Just for 30 seconds, I do feel like that's the thing that I want to do, is to get back to, like, what were we doing before we were invaded many times over? You know, we're invaded in the 1100s, and then
That was us.
Oh, that was you, was it? Oh dear.
We.
Yeah. And then we're invaded again, you know, come the 1520s, 30s, Henry VIII decides he's going to put manners on us, and the Tudors arrive. And yeah, and then, you know, we get used to in the 17th, but mainly in the 18th century, you know, Handel, Gemignani, Dubourg, all of these people are in Dublin, and they're all playing the European music. It's tunes, it's bass lines, and it's kind of ironic because that's kind of my day job, as I see it on my Italian triple harp, is I'm working from the bass up. I'm always looking at what we call figured bass or continuo bass, where you just have the bass line and nothing else, and you might be accompanying singers, you might be playing an opera or instrumental music. That's what I'm going to be doing all next week in a church in London, is recording all that kind of music. So just a bass line, and maybe a few figures to tell you what the harmony is, and now you just have to improvise.
Sorry, what's a figure?
Oh, a figure. So if you have like a G major chord, how do you know that it's G major? Well, because there's a 5 and there's a 3 underneath it, D and B above the G. So you just count up G, A, B, 3, G, A, B, C, D, 5, 5, 3. So if you see 5, 3 under a G, you know it's a G major chord.
But are you playing those figures?
Yeah, oh yeah, so you just, I mean, it tells me that it's G major. So then I'm doing whatever, could be any sort of thing.
Well,
but it's,
waffling.
I'm waffling on G major at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's, you know, one thing I do is working from the bass up and dealing with nothing but harmony. And then when I play Irish music, of course, I'm working from the top down, and I have no truck with harmony. So I have two completely different bits of my brain, you know, when I'm approaching this music. So I'm
sorry, could I cut across you again there?
Yeah.
Is there a thing about how your hand moves across the strings compared to a piano? Moves in one direction when you're playing.
Yeah, playing
chords
that's also interesting. Playing a harp is like having two left hands. It's like it's the left hand on the piano and it's another left hand. But you know, because the piano works like this, but the harp is working like that. So it's sort of for fingering purposes, it's like having two left hands, just for fingering.
And what's that thing about the direction that's in my mind?
I don't know.
That
Oh,
if
you
you're-
mean?
that you're going to play badly-dum, and you do that, say, that direction on the piano, but you do it down the way on the harp.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Am I
they're
making that up?
Well, no, but they're in. You're bringing up interesting points, because this harp, of course, I'm playing wrong in that I'm playing it on my right shoulder, because the old Irish harpers played on their left shoulder with their left hand playing the shorter strings and their right hand playing the longer strings. So their treble hand. So it's sort of like having two right hands on the piano, if you like.
So that's what you should be doing.
That's what I should be doing.
And you do what?
And I, of course, I do the mirror image, because I played modern Irish harp since I was a child, from the time I was about 7 until I was in my 20s, when I realised that this was the harp I wanted to play.
Do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. And my students do as I say and not as I do. And it's just thrilling for me to see a whole bunch of people playing on their left hand, on their left shoulder.
But I think that's great for them.
It's
to
fantastic.
See and to hear from you that you know you're doing it wrong.
Oh, yeah. I hope to be a dinosaur in my own day. I hope that in a few decades people, sure, God bless her, she was doing her best. But now we know, and then that my life will have been a success if they sort of start giggling at me when I'm old. That's the way it should be, is that people will just get better and better at this thing. And so I'm just one cog in a wheel, you know?
Wonderful.
So that's how I think about it.
Now, I know I've in a note here written that you've got Mr. Dowland's Midnight.
Well,
is it?
yeah.
Why is that connected to the decolonization?
Because I suppose I'm trying to, my tribe, as it were, we're curious about the thing that happened outside of European music making, because in modern Irish harping we have bass lines and chords and sort of jazzy harmonies and syncopations and all sorts of innovative things. So it's a really amazing, vibrant tradition that's I suppose started by Marty Cahossie and people like that in the 1970s. But going back into like the early 19th century with John Egan inventing his modern Irish harp. So I'm really curious about not doing that, which is what you'll hear when I play Irish music. But of course, Irish harpers did play harmony on their harps, but that was when they went abroad or when they were taken back. You know, so the colonists arrive, and of course, Gerald of Wales in the 1100s goes, oh, they're so lazy and disgusting and filthy and dirty, and there's no good to be had in this country at all. Oh, that harp's rather good, though. They're rather better than our guys in Paris at playing the harp. And it's like, oh, that's quite the compliment coming from our Gerald.
And especially because he was so disparaging.
Oh, yeah. Well, he's the nephew of Maurice Fitzgerald, the invader. So, of course, the first thing you do when you colonise a population is tell yourself they're not people like us, darling. And
animals.
then, yes, it makes it so much easier to, do what needs to be done. So that's what's going on in the 1100s. Then the Tudors arrive. They do exactly the same thing. They're saying, oh, these people are they're just revolting. So, but of course, the Tudors themselves fall in love with the early Irish harp. And so they not only have Irish harpers in Ireland, but they bring them back when their tour of duty is finished. They bring them back to their castles in England. And then you have people like Cormac MacDermott, who's the first royal Irish harper. It's like, this blows my mind. There's a whole cultural genocide happening in the 1500s. And yet, by 1603, James I employs the first Irish harper at court. And his wife, Anne of Denmark, has her Irish harper. They have his and hers Irish harpers at court. It's astonishing. So what are these harpers playing in England at court? What is Darby Scott, who's another Irish harper who winds up in Copenhagen playing for Christian IV of Denmark? What are they playing on their harps? So that's where I get together with my Renaissance music friends who play Renaissance viols and Renaissance lutes, and we put together programs like that. So I wanted to give you a flavour of the sort of the colonial music making from the 1500s, and also to give you a sense of what I do in the other bit of my life where I'm playing harmony. So,
and that's what you're going to play now, is what they would have been playing in the English court. And
so
the
I want to
Danish
play
court.
you a piece by John Dowland, who's the most famous, I suppose, one of the top three most famous Renaissance composers in England. And he's a famous lute composer, but because he's Catholic, Elizabeth I won't give him a job. I don't think she wants a papist at court. Though, to be fair, she had Italian papists at court, and, so she, but in any case, maybe she just didn't like him. She wouldn't give him a job, so he had to go off to Denmark and work for Christian IV. And one of the first things Christian IV did was send him back to London. Said, look, I need you to do a bit of shopping for me in London. So can you go back? Can you buy me some strings for my tennis racket? Can you employ a dancer, please? And then could you buy an Irish harp and bring back an Irish harper to go with it from London, which Dowland does. So Charles O'Reilly, or Charles O'Rachalig maybe is his name, he comes back. He doesn't last very long. But then Darby Scott shows up 10 or 15 years later, and there's an incredibly beautiful portrait of him playing with the other musicians in the 1620s in Denmark. So John Dowland was very familiar with the Irish harp and Irish harpers, so I thought it might be nice to play a bit of him. But there will be more tuning because I need to have I need to get my C's in order.
You're changing the tuning now. You're not just tuning up.
Well, you see,
You're changing the tuning.
Normally I wouldn't have to, but I work with this quite difficult piper and whistle player, and he's always asking me to play in strange and wonderful keys. So really I blame him. Otherwise I wouldn't have to tune a thing here.
So I make you a better person.
If that's how you like to think about it, Ronan, you go right ahead and think that. But actually, secretly, you definitely made me a better musician.
I wasn't expecting
I'd never
a
say that to you in
compliment
private,
back.
but I will actually pay you that compliment in public.
So I insult you and you're nice back to me.
Exactly. See, it makes me look better in front of everybody.
Can you see the blush?
So this is originally, I seem to have picked far too much slow music, but I do like playing slow music. This is a piece that paints the black night. It's called Mr. Dowland's Midnight. Thank you.
And I've just remembered a thing, you know, there's a tiny little bit of air conditioning going on here. And when you hear these instruments ring out to silence in a perfectly silent room,
Yeah.
you could listen for another minute.
You can see why the Tudors went, oh, we'll take this thing home.
Yeah.
Or even the Earl of Essex, for example. I mean, I live in Kilkenny. The Earl of Essex came to a party at the castle in Kilkenny at one point, and he paid the Earl of Ormond, Sir Thomas Butler, Thomas Dove Butler, he paid his star harper, George Cruise, 40 shillings as a tip, and he gave everybody else something like 8 shillings, among them all the other musicians. And the next night he gave all of the musicians 5 shillings, but he gave the star harper 40 shillings. So George Cruise, who was a big favourite with Elizabeth I as well, obviously star harper, they couldn't resist. Wouldn't you just love to hear what he was playing at Kilkenny Castle? But I suspect that maybe George Cruise was playing, you know, he was from the Pale, he was from, I think, County Meath. So maybe he was playing this kind of music as well as his Irish music so that they could really relate to it, you know.
Now, something let's go for another piece of music. Bridget Cruz, you wanted to play.
Yeah, because I'm...
Just keep it close to this now. It's a different
yeah,
instrument.
so it's part of this... I mean, I'm always trying to... It's a hopeless task, by the way. To try and get back to the past is hopeless. Well, there's no way of doing it. We don't know that we're building the instruments. We're doing our best to build them. We don't know... You know, there's so much we don't know, so maybe we should just give up and not even try.
You mentioned something earlier about... If you do the thing, if you make the instrument, you make the replica, you put the strings in the way they were, and You just start
You,
playing.
you hope it teaches you.
It might teach you.
You hope it. That's where we're at the HHSI.
Yeah.
Is we try and make the instruments, we try and look at the thing, and we just think, okay, now let's do it and let's see what it teaches us. So I'm also really keen to get people, not just people who play early Irish harp, but people who play all kinds of harps, because everybody's welcome at our courses. All we require is that you have a curious brain and that you really want to maybe do a bit of exploring. And so one of my bugbears is that all the versions of carillon tunes, for example, that we have now, that they're all coming through the lens of Donal O'Sullivan, who did wonderful work in the early 20th century and up into the middle of the 20th century. He did all the work on the Bunting manuscripts, or did most of it, and then he published these incredible 2 volumes on carillon in 1959. But we're still working from those versions of the tunes. And sadly, he wasn't using Bunting's field transcriptions. He was using maybe piping versions that were collected or fiddle versions that were collected. So he was working from printed 19th century collections. And therefore, you lose a lot of the juice somehow. And so I wanted to play you, because Donal O'Sullivan gives various different versions. He has 4 Bridget Cruise tunes. And the third one is the one that everybody knows. Yeah, dee 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 da dee 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 dum dee 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 dum da dum dee da 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 dee da dum dee 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 da 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 dum dee da 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 dee dee da da, and so on and so forth. But would you be surprised if I told you that at least 20% of that, or 25%, is a Donal O'Sullivan composition? So he decided he didn't like the source. He found it very defective. And for better or worse, he said, no, I think it goes this way, which is fair enough. Because he does actually say, if you bother to look, he says, look, I changed this and I changed this. But most people don't bother to look. They go, oh, yeah. That's Bridget Cruise. And
because I think I see in a lot of that is that we can play a C natural, which is called a C, or a C sharp.
Yeah.
And in a lot of those, they have C naturals and C sharps happening one after the other.
Yeah.
And you can't do that on the harp.
No, exactly. So because a lot of those tunes, I suppose, if they were played by flute players in the 18th century, fiddle players, then they would start to change. They're morphing into like major and minor keys, so they were losing their modal nature, and that's fine. So it sounded good to maybe a flute player at the end of the 18th century or in the 19th century. So I wanted to play you a version of Bridget Cruise that I've been working on with Dimrick McGillivgija. So I started, and also because it was notated by Bunting from Dennis O'Hampsey. And so he's got different versions on the page. He has the dots on one page. And then most people, if they looked, they'd definitely ignore those, because on the right-hand page, he has a nice sort of neater version, a second draft. But actually, if you look, the second draft, he's already fiddling around. Because if you look at the dots, it doesn't quite match up with the second half. So you know that there's kind of corruption. There's a clean-up job there that I don't want.
And he's clever enough that he wouldn't have made a mistake and fixed it later.
Yeah.
He would have fixed it on the first page at the time.
Well, no. Well, yes. Well, sometimes he might be fixing mistakes, but I think more often than not, he's trying to scrub it up and put it in acceptable clothing. And so I've worked on this with Dimrick, who took away the dots, and it's really lovely because often it's hard to know which words go with what tune. But Bunting writes "Struan a ruin" on the tune. You go, oh, so you know the verses of Bríd Og. He calls it Bríd Og, so young Bridget. But it's a Bridget Cruise song, and those words show up. So for once, it's easy to lock the surviving lyrics that survive elsewhere with the tune. And then Dimrick put it together, came back to me, and I went, wow, that's really rather different. So now I play it the way he sings it. So it's not quite like what's on the page, but I think he's doing a good job of a plausible job of reverse engineering. So I'll do a bit of tuning and play that.
Okay, and while you're doing that, we're coming to the end, but if anyone has any thoughts of questions they want to ask, start thinking of them now. And if you don't, that's fine too. I have always more to ask myself. But if you think of any, after this we might ask if you want to say anything. No tuning.
I think it's... don't jinx it now, Ronan. Don't jinx it.
was hypnotic.
Great. And did it sound like Carolyn?
I don't even know who Carolyn is.
Yeah, great. Because, see, I think we don't really know Carolyn yet.
Yeah.
I really think he's a lot more... He's a lot more Irish than he is European. I mean, obviously, in his concerto and stuff like that, he's very European. But I think there are two sides to Carolyn. And people say, oh, yes, he's very Baroque and he's this, that, and the other. Well, yes, sometimes. But he isn't doing, like, Baroque bass lines. None of them are doing Baroque bass lines. So I could play you a sort of Baroque piece of Carolyn, but I'm really keen these days on showing his kind of Irish side, you know, as I see it.
That's fabulous. I'm starting to get in the tickle, so can somebody take over from me here? And anybody think of a question to ask?
Well, we're probably coming up to the end. Oh, yes, actually, if there are questions, and if not, you just cough away, and I will tune a bit.
Have you any questions, Siobhán Armstrong?
Do I have any questions? Yes, can we hang out more? Because I really like playing music with you. I shouldn't really say that in public because now it's official, isn't it?
Now it's official.
Now I can't pretend that I really don't like you.
We always abuse each other so much. People ask, "Are we married?"
Oh yeah, people did ask at a concert once because we tend to abuse each other a lot on stage. And finally, somebody said, "Are you two married?" And we went, "Oh, okay, maybe we need to cut down the amount of time that we slag each other because it's unseemly."
But I enjoy and I love playing with you too.
Thank you.
So, will we finish off then if you've nothing else to say?
I should just say that you talk about this being your sort of dying and going to heaven harp, but when you play Port-na-Bookie on your pipes, that's my desert island music. I have to admit that too. I don't know if any of you have heard Ronan playing Port-na-Bookie. It's like, you're all right, Ronan, you're all right. You're not the worst.
But see, a thing happens when the instrument is doing what you want it to do, and it's allowing you to do those things. The two of you are meeting and flying off, flying with the birds, and I do. They're there and they're packed up and they're not coming out.
Can I ask, do you not like playing the pipes with the harp, or is it that you think it's...
I'm glad you asked. No, we have a technical problem that the pipes that I play that fit volume-wise, sound-wise, tone-wise with these are the B pipes, Baroque sort of a sound, very low, gentle, and they just don't.
They don't work tone-wise. They don't work tuning-wise with this harp, because I'm tuned like in G with an F natural and F sharp, and I'd really need to be tuned in B with kind of C sharps and F sharps, and it kind of gets tricky. I don't really have many notes in common with his scale. So we do it sometimes when Roisin and the three of us do it together. Sometimes we have pipes on the voice, and I'll sort of drone around on the harp, but I'm really limited on what I can do when he's playing the pipes.
If you think of the 8 notes of the scale, maybe you can tell me if it's 3 or 2 or 3 of them that you can't play.
It's like it's more. I really only have about 3 notes I can play out of the 7. Yeah, I'd have a B and an E and an F sharp.
I much prefer her when she plays less.
Right. Okay, we'll get the pipes out then.
But in fact, it works. It's a constraint, although it leaves poor Siobhán quite hobbled and unable to do much. It's that sparseness, and I love sparse. And it works, but you wouldn't want to be spending your whole life with a hobbled harpist.
Yeah, true.
For the harpist's sake, or the harper's sake.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
What is it that distinguishes an Irish harp from other harps?
Oh,
Ba-boom.
very good. Well, I would say, I'd ask you a question in return. I'd say, which Irish harp do you mean? You know, because there are loads of different types of Irish harps. There's this early one from, broadly before 1800 with the wire strings, and there's the more modern. Well, there are John Egan's harps. They were strung with gut, and he was inventing all sorts of amazing things. And now you've modern Irish harps with carbon fibre strings or nylon strings. So there are all these different kinds of harps. These ones are they tend to be kind of unique to the Gaelic part of the world, to Gaelic Scotland and the Highlands and Islands and Ireland. So we came up with this thing. Who knows when? I mean, it's well established by the time Gerald of Wales shows up, I think, in the 1100s. So maybe it goes back to before the 1000s. I don't know. The first image we have might be reliably said to be from the 1000s, and it didn't fall off the back of a lorry in the 1000s fully formed as a mature instrument. So I suspect there must be like a 100 or 200 year backstory to that. So that's one very specific organology, you know, your tree trunk that you chop down and put the backplate on. And then pedal harps and modern Irish harps are coming out of the same stable. So it's a curved sound box, and then you glue a soundboard to it. So this has no glue or nails or screws in it. They're mortise and tenon joints, and so theoretically, if you take the strings off, you could just pull the harp apart into 3 pieces. Whereas pedal harps and modern Irish harps, it's a much more sophisticated construction type that comes from sort of out of I suppose, post-Enlightenment 19th century technology, you know, where technology gets going, where you start to have pianos, you know, built. So they're just completely different instruments, different strings. These have brass wire strings. You could, they started out with gut strings on modern harps, and now, as I say, nylon and all the rest of it, but just completely different in every single way. The only thing they have in common is that they're triangular with strings. They're all harps. You know, what defines a harp is the fact that it's triangular and that the strings come out of the resonating chamber at an oblique angle. So they have that in common, and after that, all different kinds of harps are very different, you know. I mean, obviously, African harps, Asian harps, Burmese harps, you know, the fabulous soundgok in Burma, wonderful instruments like that.
What harps around the world have metal strings?
I think I used to think it was only our harps, but I think in South America, because the Spanish baroque harp, this harp I play with the 2 rows of strings, that went to South America in the 17th century. And I think there are sort of harps, I'm not sure if it's Paraguay or somewhere else in South America, where they have metal strings on their harps. So it's not completely unique to this part of the world. But I think it comes from the fact that we had incredible metalworking technology in Ireland. If you go into the Kildare Street, go into the National Museum, Kildare Street, and just look around the ground floor at the staggering, the sophistication, you have to have a magnifying glass to see this complexity of what's going on. So for them to draw wires, like easy peasy stuff. And so because we had incredible metalworking technology, we had the ability to produce strings, but we also had a weather and a climate that really does not favour gut strings at all. So I think this is also why in our part of the world we have metal strings, because this harp has no problem being in a damp, sort of cold, drafty castle. Not a problem, it's very at home. But put a gut-strung harp in there and it just completely loses the plot. It just doesn't want to know.
And equally put this into an air-conditioned concert hall.
Go to the Midwest in America in winter into a very, very dry concert hall. It doesn't cope at all.
What happens?
It just goes completely out of tune. You can't tune it.
It
just won't hold tuning.
Yeah.
Just won't hold tuning at all.
Because I know with the pipes, the tuning goes completely wonky. There are 7 reeds. Each of the reeds starts taking different pressures. It loses a lot of the high harmonics.
All right.
Not high harmonics. All the harmonics from whatever your basic note is. It's all gone. The instrument just becomes fluffy. It sounds like this. Instead of sounding like that, it just loses all its character. And then you go in, and what I used to do, which was drastic when I was touring, would be that if I had a night off and I could hear the pipes, I could feel the pipes becoming worse and worse. During the night off, as soon as I came off stage the night before that, I would go into the shower in my hotel room, turn on the shower and get the steam going, and I'd play the pipes in there for 15 minutes until they got completely strangled by moisture. Yeah. I put them back in the box and I wouldn't touch them then until 2 days later for the next gig, and they'd come out and they'd be perfect.
Yeah, so instruments they're created as part of their culture and the landscape and the climate, and it all plays a role in what you wind up with in your country. Like they have silk strings on harps in Japan and Asia, and so that's you work with the thing that works in your culture. So it's quite interesting. So what tune are we going to end off with? What you fancy? You can do
Oh, we do Sheila.
Sheila Ní Chonlainn. Okay,
Will you tell us about Sheila?
so this is by, let me see, Molly Nick Alpine is by William Conlon, so it must be by the other brother. There are two brothers, Conlon brothers in Sligo, who are harper composers born in the 17th century. They live all the way into the 18th century. So this is Sheila Ní Chonlainn, love song, and we're going to play two versions of this, or rather, I'm going to play. So we'll play. Both versions were collected by Bunting from Harpers, but he says this first version he got from Donal Black, singing, so a harper who was singing to his harp, and then the other version that I'll play in the middle, he says he got from Arthur O'Neill playing. So it's two settings of this song collected by Bunting.
And before we do, can we please say thank you very much to the Seamus Ennis Arts Centre for allowing this to happen, because without their adventurous programming, so many things would
Thank
never
you.
happen.
Thank you,
And we think they're fantastic.
Wonderful. And
Thanks
thank you
to
for having
Niall
me.
Niall doing the sound, and Ian and Shane and Lauren and Paul.
We've been fabulously looked
All
after
of
all
those
night, and
people.
it's really I think it's my third time to be here. I'm always thrilled to come out here. So thank you so much, and thank you for having me,
How
Ronan.
art centres should be run.
Yes, basically. Thank you for having me.
Thank you
It's
for being
pleasure.
had.
Oh, at this point I realise I need to retune. Hang on. Shush, shush.
You make it look effortless.
That's it. Not so effortless. It slipped again.
But again, when things dry out, the stability of the tuning and this all relies on friction. It's metal
Yeah, exactly.
in timber chambers, timber holes.
These are tapered pins going through a wooden neck.
And if they dry out, it just won't hold the tuning. That was Larlin and Hardy.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Bye, bye, bye. Thank you, everybody.
I think we're allowed snacks now.